Okay, we're going to give everybody a minute or so to file in to the virtual room here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Wendy Maldonado D'Amico, and I would like to welcome everyone to Entrepreneurship at Yale today, conversation with Jorge Torres, Interim Managing Director of Tsai City. Jorge, we're so honored to have you here. Another thing I wanted to just mention is that this does also happen to be Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month. So I'm really honored that not only Tsai City is co-sponsoring tonight's event, but the Yale Latino Alumni Network, YLAN, as well as First Gen Yale are co-sponsoring tonight's event. So thanks to all of you for being here and also for spreading the word so that we can have an awesome conversation tonight with Jorge, who has such an incredible background that we'll explore tonight. So a couple of items of business. You guys know the drill here with Accelerate Yale. We're going to talk for about half an hour or so. And then we're going to transition to live Q&A. So what I would invite you to do for this particular webinar is Jorge has invited all of you to put your questions into the chat at the beginning if you want, so that he can kind of tailor his conversation with us to your interests. So please feel free to get those questions, drop those questions into chat or the Q&A bubbles at the bottom. And we are recording this. So if you need to step away or you want to watch this later, we will post it to our YouTube channel later. So don't worry about that. Okay. All right. Excellent. So, did I want to say anything else? Nope, that's it. So I'm going to introduce Jorge in just a moment. Before I do so, I just wanted to say that we're really honored to have Jorge here tonight because he has a background that, you know, he was at Yale when I was there. He was class of 96, I was class of 93, but he has started his career. He started his career in STEM, became a patent attorney, went into venture capital, has invested in many startups, and also gone on to become the Dean of Pearson College, serving during the pandemic, and he is now at Tsai City. He has also taught at Yale and taught outside of Yale and has served as mentor and coach to many, many startup founders. So I just want to welcome you, Jorge, this evening. So thrilled to have you here. And without further ado, what I'd like to start out with was sort of talking about who Jorge was, who you were before you came to Yale. And I think you have a couple of slides to share with us. Yeah. Where do you come from? Tell us a little bit about your background. How did all this get started?
How did all this get started? Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I'm really, honored and touched to be in the company of people who, company of alumni who've shared this platform and this time engaging with you in this community. So thank you for giving me the chance to tell my story and engage and meet some new alumni that I don't know already. And so as Wendy mentioned, if you've got questions that you have for me that you already know you want me to touch on, put them in the chat and I can tailor my comments in such a way that I get to them sooner rather than later. So where did I come from? I do have some slides. I'm going to share my screen. Don't worry, I don't have a whole deck. Just literally 2 slides. So do this. So this is where I come from. This is a shot from the roof of the Joint Industry Board of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the IBEW, Local 3 in Flushing, Queens. So I was, my parents, I come from Ponce, if you really want to trace it, Ponce, Puerto Rico, which is the capital of the south of Puerto Rico, San Juan being the capital of the north. Both parents were born in the same hospital 4 years apart and met in New York at the Corso, which was a salsa club. My dad had just gotten out of the army, having done a tour, 2 years in Saigon, as it was known then, and 2 years in Panama. Mom was working for the civil service in Mayor Wagner's administration, and they met at a salsa club and got married 8 months later. Like, that happens for nobody, right? But
That's
They're
very
like
decisive,
the
8 months
exception that
later.
proves the rule. I guess I'm a living exception to the rule. It's like you don't meet your partner in a club, but they're together now 50 years and they still live in this community, which is called creatively Electchester, because it was a development created between World War I and World War II for the families of the men, and it was mostly all men back then, who were electricians in the Union, therefore Electchester. So I didn't grow up in these two towers. I grew up in one of the smaller buildings, which is not in the frame. And I grew up, I was born in the Bronx, in the South Bronx Union Hospital on 180 something street off the concourse, which is not even there anymore. We lived in the Marble Hill section of the Bronx, which is, some people will say it's Manhattan, but it's actually part of the Bronx. And when I was 5 years old, my parents moved the family to Electchester, and this is where I grew up and went to Catholic school for 12 years before going to college. The Sisters of Charity are the ones who sort of pounded the importance of education into my brain. It was reinforced mightily by my parents and my mom especially, who always said that the one thing people can never take away from you is your education. And sort of truer words have never been spoken. So I actually went to St. Francis Prep High School, which is in Fresh Meadows, Queens, about 5 minutes from the area you're looking at right now. At the time, I don't know if this is still true, but at the time it was the Catholic school with the largest enrollment of any Catholic school in the country. It had 790 something students. And so big private Catholic school. Basically everyone there was either, first generation college bound or second generation college bound, sort of like Queens. Today, Queens in the late 80s, early 90s was the most diverse county in America, and it still is. And that very much was the world I grew up in. I always say that my friend group, we were all the science nerds. We were devotees of Mr. Baracelli, Anthony Baracelli, who was a longtime science teacher there. We were the Benetton ad incarnate, right? So look, for those of you who may not know Benetton, go Google it and you'll see their ad campaigns. That was us, a very diverse set of kids. And I came to Yale from that environment, and so went from these two towers to these two towers. And so I went to Yale College. Wasn't in Branford, I was in Davenport, but admired Branford from afar, especially Harkness Tower. Had lots of friends in Branford, almost transferred to Branford, but I decided to stick it out in Davenport, which is where I was. But of course, spent a lot of time on the tower on the left, which back then was known as KBT, Klein Biology Tower, known back then for having like a killer dining hall on the roof, where if you had time to grab lunch, you wouldn't go down to Commons if you could grab lunch at KBT on the top floor dining hall that had beautiful views in New Haven. Today, it's the Klein Science Tower, it's Klein Science Building. It's undergoing a massive renovation and modernization. But so I went from, the two towers at Electchester to the two towers at Yale. And let me stop there, because I imagine, Wendy, you have some questions about that.
Yeah. So, and quick thing, you guys, thanks to the person who let me know that the chat had been disabled. I just enabled it. I think it's a default setting now on this account, so my apologies for that. I'm really curious, Jorge, at the time that we were at Yale in the 90s, Yale had this reputation of being very liberal arts focused. And there were science majors going up Science Hill, but the strengths of Yale at that time are really known to be history, English, poli-sci, the directed studies, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really curious about why you decided to come to Yale, and you stayed that course. You still, yes, you changed your major within the STEM area, but talk to me about why you ended up choosing Yale, and kind of what that path looked like for you. We don't need to dwell on it a lot because I know that this audience wants to talk about the entrepreneurship side, but I'm curious about that.
Well, I mean, Yale still, Yale College, in my view, is still the best liberal arts college in the world. And it was then, it still is today. But Yale attracts spiky people, people who are like really good in one thing, and people who at the same time have broad interests, right? And that'll be, if I have a conversation with anyone about entrepreneurship at Yale, or sort of how I see, Yale student and faculty entrepreneurship, like it's spiky and broad at the same time. So this question actually does have a lot of relevance to the topic of conversation this evening. But I was interested in particle physics, and I was interested in sort of the physical underpinnings of biology. And so really, I knew that Yale had a very sort of broad liberal arts education, but it also had great science programs, particularly in the life sciences. So Sid Altman had won the Nobel Prize in '89 for discovering the catalytic properties of mRNA. That was something as a sophomore that I had read about, and it kind of got Yale on my radar. But also, that following year, I took, AP American History with Mr. Zintarski, and I became very interested in history, and Yale had the best history department. So I was like, why, go to another school that is so STEM focused and I think attracts more pointy people, when I can still have a great education in STEM, but also take amazing courses in history. It's the same calculus that I think attracts, the world's best young scholars to Yale College today. It hasn't changed. And I think, sort of the spikiness and the broadness are a defining feature, defining distinctive of what differentiates entrepreneurship at Yale. And let me take, these are literally the only 2 slides I have. So I'll take
okay. All right. So you, the audience will have to forgive me, but I got to ask this question. How would you have we were there around the same time in the mid 90s. How would you, mid late 90s, how would you have described the atmosphere around entrepreneurship at Yale in the 90s?
I saw that question in the prep notes. I don't know. That was not part of my world. So no entrepreneurs in my family. My family, as I mentioned, dad was in the war and entered the Union and retired about 10 years ago. Mom worked in civil service. I'm one generation removed from, the grinding poverty of Puerto Rico in the 30s and 40s, that kind of preceded Operation Bootstrap and the Great Migration from the island to places like New York, Connecticut, and so on. So, so coming to Yale, I wanted to be a PhD scientist. That was from the beginning. I was I landed in MB&B ultimately as a major at the end of my second term. And I wanted, 98% of MB&B majors at that time went to medical school. It's probably the same now. I was in the 2% who had no aspiration for medical school, but wanted to do basic research in structural biology. And I got to do it. I mean, that's the amazing thing at Yale is I got to do it in Don Engelman's lab. I became a nut about like how proteins that go across the cell membrane assemble themselves. And I did that research on that topic in Don Engelman's lab. And I did research at Sloan Kettering on that topic. And so that was my world. That, and also being a part of La Casa Cultural and involved in sort of creating community. At Yale's where I learned how to foster and create community and organize people for that purpose, not only within sort of Latino students at Yale, but also in New Haven. That was my world. So, but I did start in an organization, and it's in the archives somewhere. So I was entrepreneurial. I started USS Undergraduate Science Symposium, which was the idea was to bring women and people from underrepresented group students to showcase their research in the sciences. And it was before STARS. So that's kind of what STARS does these days. And, we ran that organization for 2 semesters, and then it, like a lot of student organizations, it died out. But that was my entrepreneurial experience at Yale, such as it was. So I haven't answered your question, but I've told you a lot about sort of where my mind was. It wasn't until later, it was actually law school at Penn, where I had a very formative experience that involved entrepreneurship that I could talk about.
So talk to us about that, because I think it's your path predicted that you would go into the sciences or medicine or research, and yet you kind of ended up becoming a patent attorney, and you ended up in venture. So talk to us about how that happened.
Well, I went to law school. So first of all, I met a patent attorney in my junior year through a program at Cornell University that was ostensibly about tracking us into PhD programs. And they made the mistake of inviting a patent attorney, but I was the beneficiary of that mistake, because she told us, if you ever, don't want to do research, you can use all this training in the scientists in the world of patent law. And so that planted the seed when I was 20. And so by the time I graduated Yale, I had decided I didn't want to pursue science, and that I would instead go on to law school. By the time I was 27, I was a 1L, 25. I was 24. So in that 4-year period, I graduated, got my first job out of Yale. My second job out of Yale was with Skadden Arps. And I was ultimately a technical advisor for the lawyers at Skadden Arps on all things related to science and innovation at a young age. And even though there were plenty of Skadden attorneys who were telling me don't go to law school, I went to law school and I loved it. I was very focused on becoming a patent attorney. And so the short answer to your question is, as an attorney, patent attorney, I worked, yes, with a lot of innovators, but my specialty was patent litigation. And kind of through trying patent cases, I developed an expertise in handicapping how judges would rule in certain patent disputes. And so I started to develop a base of clients who valued that skill. They were venture capital and private equity companies who had life sciences companies, portfolio companies involved in patent litigation. And they would hire me to kind of handicap the odds of the outcomes in these cases. And I developed a very niche practice doing that. And I sort of became the go-to person at the firm who at the last firm I was at, which was Fisher & Richardson, for anything that was not patent litigation. It was like businessy or sort of startup oriented. And it was through that practice that I met Carter Weiss, who at that time was CEO of a small consumer brand called Built. And Built was their first line of products were these totes made out of neoprene, which is the material that you use in a scuba diving suit. And their innovation was using that material as a bottle holder for wine and other things. And then they made lunch pails. You've seen their product. Yep. Carter and his team built, they scaled Built from zero to $30 million a year in revenue, with like 6 million in outside, like a very small amount of not even six, like a very small amount of venture capital. And so based on that experience, Carter and his partner Frank Lynn started a venture capital firm that was sort of the firm that Carter wished had existed when Carter was starting the company. And Bill was my client at Fisher & Richardson. I was sort of the outside general counsel. And when I was looking to go on the market for VC jobs in the winter of 2011, which was still, the depths of the Great Recession, I was telling Carter about how I, was having a hard time finding a role at an existing firm because there were no jobs in venture in 2011 to be had. And Carter was like, well, why don't you sort of talk to my partner about joining us? I'd love to have you. And I had that conversation, and that was how I kind of created my first job in venture capital, which was really through a client relationship that I had with the CEO of Built New York, who was a firm client that I got to work very closely with.
So do you, I'm gonna stop for a moment and ask you if you feel as if it's possible for somebody today to have that kind of opportunity. If yes, that's great. If not, and somebody wanted to hop and find a way to get their toe in the door with venture, what kind of advice would you give them?
So if I was advising someone in my situation?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is, when I was in that situation, I benefited very much from VCs who were early to blogging about the craft of early stage investing. So people like Brad Feld and Fred Wilson, Dave Hornick, they were just blogging, and they weren't doing it in the way VCs do it today. It was really like build a brand. They were doing it because blogging was new, but also because they were working out their own sort of tensions with how to work with entrepreneurs, how to navigate the business, what they were sharing. They were building communities, especially in Fred's case. They were building online communities who were passionate about new technologies and the business of venture capital. And so I read everything, right? Mm-hmm. But I still had to do it by myself. I still, sort of didn't have anyone who was mentoring me or kind of guiding me. And nevertheless, I learned enough to kind of talk my way into the Kauffman Fellows Program, which is this acclaimed venture capital fellowship for, at that time, beginning VCs, and sort of convinced really accomplished investors and my future partners at Silas Capital to make a bet on me, an unknown quantity. Today, there's a lot more out there that you can learn. But it's hard to know like what the information, which information is good, and it's still hard to find someone to apprentice to. So my advice would be to kind of talk to as many people as you can to get as much perspective on the business before you start making all sorts of changes, especially if you're switching careers, right? And you already, like I did, had a successful career in one field. It's important to get enough perspective to understand what the full scope of the job is and sort of figure out who's someone that, is not only going to hire you and give you the opportunity to make investments, but is going to train you and apprentice you and sort of hopefully pass on the knowledge to you, because venture is still very much an apprenticeship business. And I think if you look at successful investors, they apprentice to other successful investors, or they learn from people who took the time to kind of break down the sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the business.
So that actually is a really handy segue into your teaching work, because you've told me that you have many passions, but one of them actually happens to be teaching. And as it so happens, you are teaching a course not only at Yale, but also online on venture capital. Is that correct?
Yes. So I've taught for the last 5 years, and actually the story of how I came back to Yale is important to this, if I can get into it. So I gotta say, like for many years, there really did only one thing that connected me to Yale, and it was helping to start the Yale Latino Alumni Association, which was a New York based, I think it was maybe a tri-state based alumni association, but it was the first alumni group for Latino alumni. And but outside of being on the board of that and working to get that off the ground, I was kind of disconnected from Yale for a long time. I didn't come to a couple of reunions, but I had a friend who wanted to see an exhibit at the art gallery, so we came up. And while I was here, I was touching getting back in touch with sort of all the different spaces and communities and history. And that's when I think about like how Yale wins in recruiting top talent, in telling its story and how it differentiates itself, it always is going to hit on community, history, and place. And coming back to the place myself for that art exhibit really sparked a sort of a reconnection with Yale, and a memory as well that I had taken a residential college seminar program on the Human Genome Project, which was one of the best classes I had ever taken at Yale. And I said, you know what, I should come back and teach. I had always done some teaching. People had told me that, I should go into teaching full time. I never listened to them. But in 2017, 5 years ago, I said, let me apply to teach a residential college seminar on venture capital. And the student committee that considers such proposals selected my course on the first try. And they, I've been teaching that course now once a year, with the exception of one of the years that I was dean of Pearson, ever since. And when I came back to Yale on a more permanent basis to be dean, a big reason was that the best day out of the week was the one day that I came up from New York to teach my class. I was doing a lot of things, but that day, I'd come up in the morning, prep on the train, teach, have lunch usually with a student, a group of students, teach, have office hours, and then I'd take the train back. And I'd always call my parents on the way back. And it was like just gushing with like, I met this student and this student told me this thing and I could help them with that thing. And so, I told friends at Yale that I want to come back in a more permanent, if there's an opportunity to come back on a more sustained basis to Yale, to interact with students, that I wanted to do that. And one of those friends, Dean Galvez, the director of La Casa Cultural, was the one who told me when the Pearson deanship, opened up, and she's the one who encouraged me to apply. So I have her to thank for the opportunity to serve as dean. And this is all to say that my sort of time as dean was transformative in a lot of ways for me. The main one was confirming this hunch that I had, which is that my calling, what I do really well, generally speaking, is bringing the best out of people. And as the one way I do that is through the teaching that I do. And what makes my class, I think, a lot of fun is I get to bring guest speakers in. And recently, one of those guest speakers told me about Maven, because I was saying, gosh, I'd really like to scale my impact in my teaching. He told me about this new startup called Maven, which is a marketplace for cohort-based courses. Courses that don't have thousands of people taking the course asynchronously and never completing it, but instead doing it as a cohort, as a peer group, supporting one another in their learning journey. And he suggested that I teach a course on Maven, and it turns out in sort of the last 2 years, Maven has become the destination for people who want to teach high quality courses, and also people who want to learn. And so I've got a course up right now that we're going to teach, that I'm going to run a beta cohort of about 20 learners. It's called Venture Fluent, so that you can build your fluency in the language of investing in early stage companies. And I'll stop there because all the information is at getventurefluent.com, which I think you're going to put in the chat.
I just dropped it into the chat. Okay. All right.
Awesome.
Oh, look at that. Thanks, Clara. Okay. So I do want to make sure we get to questions, because they are coming in. So I guess what I would love to do, I could ask you a bazillion questions. I'm really curious if you could describe the current atmosphere on campus regarding entrepreneurship and innovation and VC. particularly for folks who are not current students who are out there, alumni in the world. I think it's a topic of intense curiosity. So can you describe what's happening at Tsai City and what's happening at Yale in general around topics of innovation and entrepreneurship?
I'm happy to do that. And I know as an alumnus, when I was not as engaged with Yale as I am now, like you can wonder like what's going on and how do I plug in? And before I say it, I want to make sure everyone knows I speak for myself and my personal experience. And I want to, acknowledge the leadership of Claire Lineweber, who speaks for Tsai City, and also her partnership and mentorship as well. And I also want to acknowledge Josh Gabal, the new head of Yale Ventures, who speaks for entrepreneurship and innovation broadly, particularly as it relates to faculty innovation. So, they're the ones who have the bird's eye view on this question. And so what I'm going to say is really based on my personal experience, wearing multiple hats over many years, alumnus, instructor, dean, and now supporter of student entrepreneurs in my current role at Tsai City. And so, gosh, if there is a headline takeaway, I don't think there has, certainly in my lifetime since I've been affiliated with Yale, a better time to be a student entrepreneur, a faculty entrepreneur, or be an alumnus who wants to get plugged in, into the entrepreneurial ecosystem here. There is so much tailwind behind the idea of Yale supporting Yale, the institution supporting the idea that innovation and entrepreneurship and its many manifestations is something that is part and parcel with a liberal arts education, with the way that Yaleys should be impacting the world, with the way that Yale is going to live up to its responsibilities to New Haven, Connecticut, and the region, right? So a lot of things, I would say, even within the last several years, have come together, from the president's office to the deans of the schools and the college to Yale Ventures to Tsai City. I think it's a lot of opportunity, and I think if I'm a student looking to choose a college, for certainly more, to your earlier point, certainly more than back in the 90s, Yale is got to be one of the colleges that is up there with any other that you consider. And I think about this one first year student, class of 26, who I know through my work at Tsai City, who, when you talk to him, not only is he sort of obsessed with certain problems in machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? But he has interests beyond that, right? He is spiky and he is broad. He, for me, is sort of who a Yale entrepreneur is and should be. I think he's in one of our mentor development programs right now. I think he was accepted. I haven't touched base with him in a while, but when I think about the possibility that Yale could play a part, and no small part, in creating 1,000 Joe Tsais, right, for the next generation, right? I think of students like this, and so I think that this is the time as an alumnus to plug in some way, and I've already given an explanation of how I got back plugged in. It started with coming back to the place, right? Place, history, and community, right? Coming back to the place, if you haven't been here in a long time, could potentially transform your life. You may not sort of like go all in and become the dean of a residential college 6 weeks before the pandemic like I did, but you might want to spend more time here and learn about what's happening. Teach a class. The residential college seminar program exists because it's a reflection of the understanding that the curriculum that professors in the standing departments provide is necessarily limited and not very practical when you think of sort of the full scope of human endeavor that one can engage in, when you think about the education students today want. And so anyone who is an expert in their field can come in, propose a course, and submit it to a student committee, which decides whether or not the course is selected. I think it's great that, yes, there's support and supervision by the dean's the dean's office when you're teaching, but when you're teaching these courses, you live and die by the opinions of your students. If you're not a good teacher, you're not going to be invited back. But if you're a really good teacher, you're going to be invited back. So that's just one way to get plugged in. Come in and be a mentor at Tsai City, which has a great sort of light touch, as much as you want to eat from the buffet model of mentorship, which is to say, you shouldn't be worried that if you raise your hand, you're going to get crushed with all this inbound. I think, my colleague Victor Padilla-Taylor has been mapping and managing the mentorship piece for us for now, if Tsai City's 5 years, I think he's been doing it for 4 years out of the 5, and he's got it down to a science to sort of how to engage with mentors. So I don't know, I could talk about specific companies and students, Wendy, but I think this is the time to get plugged in.
Okay, very cool. Thank you, Jorge. So, I'm not going to take up more of your time with my conversation with you, because we're getting some really great questions and I want to pivot to those. So, there was a question that came in from Terrence right away. So Terrence is a San Francisco-based BC Yaley. He is Trumbull, class of 01. He would love your thoughts on how to build a stronger connection between Yale and Silicon Valley. What are your thoughts?
Wow, that's like way above my grade. I think that's a President Salve question. So I mean, those connections exist through the Yale Club of Silicon Valley. Help me out, Wendy. I imagine that exists.
We do. So I'll bail you out here for a minute. So there is a very active chapter, Yale Club of Silicon Valley. They actually co-sponsored our last pitch competition. And we would love if Yale Club of Silicon Valley folks are out there, we would love to host an in-person event with Accelerate Yale and Yale Club of Silicon Valley.
There are 2 Silicon Valley VCs on the board of trustees, Ann Coe and David Z. And that is a strong connection. Anne was just here, I think tonight or this week.
Yes, is she? Yeah. Did you stop by Tsai City, or maybe I think she was going to talk to Claire. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure, okay. But the point is that there are connections that exist. There are, when it comes to establishing stronger connections. I think Wendy, you're a great example of sort of how to sort of be the thing that you want to see in the world, right? So my call to action is that if you want to see stronger connections between your region and the university, get involved, reach out to me, right? To have a tailored conversation on how to do that based on your interests and your desire, particularly as it relates to connecting with students who are exploring entrepreneurship and innovation more broadly at the university. I think there's, the only limit to sort of how to deepen the connection and strengthen the community ties is our imagination. And I, for one, don't rule anything out. Everything's on the table. There are things that work, and there's a lot. What I've learned over 5 years, there's a lot of built up institutional knowledge at Tsai City about how to really meaningfully engage students. And so I'm fortunate that I get to tap that institutional knowledge in my colleagues' brains every day. And so that could be another way for someone who's looking to plug in to kind of figure out how to build these ties. Now, if you're talking about getting Yaleys to go out after graduation to the Bay Area, a lot do. They typically are undergraduates landing at big tech, which competes with consulting and finance. in terms of the big industries that suck up a lot of the talent that comes out of Yale College every day, not just Yale College, but SOM and other graduate professional schools. And so those ties are there. So maybe it's a matter of organizing in your community and finding out. And this is something I tell students when they graduate my class and they go to places like Boston, New York, LA, the Valley, and they're like, I want to get plugged in as an alumnus now to circles of entrepreneurs with the Yale affiliation. And I give them the same message. You're a recent grad. Everyone loves recent grads. You're going to, for the first year of your year out, people are just going to be congratulating for doing something that you thought was just a fait accompli. Of course you were going to graduate. It was hard, but they're going to be so excited to meet you. Leverage that to be a community builder and bring people together. So it all depends on context, what you want to achieve, what you have time to do, but I think nothing's off the table.
Okay. I wanted to here's a question from Alden Richards. Alden asks, is Tsai City connecting to other centers for innovation and entrepreneurship in Connecticut and the larger national entrepreneurship ecosystem? Can you speak to that, Jorge?
Connections between our innovation center and other innovation centers in the state?
In the state and maybe outside of the state, kind of more nationally, I think is Tsai City mapping to other similar organizations at other universities or in the United States?
Yeah, so that's not something that I don't know the answer to that. I do know that our team does not kind of look sort of at navel gaze and think that we can't learn from other institutions. And in fact, our executive director, Claire, comes to Yale after leading, that same function at Wharton to great effect and success, right? Has brought a lot of the best practices over while contextualizing the work for the Yale sort of setting, the Yale context. But beyond that, if you're looking for specific connections, I'm not aware of how we're mapping onto sort of the innovation, the sort of innovation education landscape more broadly.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe Claire can put an answer in the chat. I see her.
Okay, thank you, Claire. If you want to drop any, Claire Line-Weber, the executive director of the Tsai Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale, is a wonderful partner to Accelerate Yale, and she's actually our participant tonight. You can see her dropping in a few nuggets here into the chat here and there. So Claire, I invite you to answer that question if you wish. Feel free. Okay. And Claire noted in the chat that Tsai City is hosting a Connecticut University pitch off in November. So you can go to Tsai City's website and subscribe to the newsletter, and you'll get a nice little newsletter every week that tips you off to those kinds of things. So let's see here. I'm not sure if you can answer this question or not, Jorge, but Terrence says that his firm is invested in over 200 startups. He's a VC guy. Could City set up a tech job board that he could post job postings to? And I've actually heard the same type of question from different alumni. So does City have a job postings board, or is that something handled more through OC, the Office of Career Strategy?
More through the Office of Career Strategy.
Okay.
And if it's just about getting the word out, if that's all you want to do is just try to find maximum exposure, OCS is the right thing, is the right place for it, in fact, because starting from first year at Yale College, students are trained and habituated to go look for those opportunities at OCS, not at Tsai City. What I would advise, if you want to take that to the next level, if you want to sort of go beyond and beyond supporting your portfolio companies and be in the flow of the talent networks that are at Yale, come back and meet students, come back and give a talk in one of the intensives that we run at Tsai City, which are these co-curricular non-credit learning opportunities that go deep on a topic of interest to students. Because it's one thing to post it and get the word out, and that's like a first order level of support for portfolio companies. But I think what's sort of the next level and could be really interesting is spending time here, connecting in the ways that I said, but also sort of getting a sense of what the talent landscape looks like, and being able to like refer specific people to opportunities, specific students to opportunities at portfolio companies. And so that happens all the time. So I'm teaching an intensive right now on investing in innovation. And by chance, one of my colleagues from the Kauffman Fellows program was in town. He sat in as an observer. He made a couple of comments, and one of the students in the class who's at the Yale School of the Environment, approached him, and they're in a conversation now about possibly bringing her on board for an internship. That stuff happens all the time, but my buddy wouldn't sort of be in that sort of close proximate relationship with talent had he not kind of just been in town and shown up to my intensive. So hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. Thank you. So I have these next two questions are a little unrelated, but I think we want to try to answer them if we can. Peter asks if you've ever heard of the Immaculate Conception in the context of Bitcoin type software. Does this
say that again? That was
this is like I don't
chat?
understand this question, but it's in the chat and it's also in the Q&A bubbles, and I'll read it again. Have you ever heard of the Immaculate Conception in the context of Bitcoin type software?
No.
Okay. All right. That's okay. I thought I would try to ask it anyway.
Maybe I should. Could someone who asked the question like post a link to a white paper or equivalent so we can all learn about this?
Yeah, that would be great. So Peter, if you're still here and you could provide a little context to your question, that would be great. Please drop it into the chat. Here's another question. What would you recommend to a late bloomer Yale alum before class of 93? Thank you. With a non-tech hot idea that is being proven on the ground. So he describes it as he makes non-emergency medical transportation available to those most in need, tackling equity issues head on.
That's great. What advice about getting that off the ground? Well, first of all, I'll point us back to research that shows that by the Kauffman Foundation, which created the Kauffman Fellows program 27 years ago, that said that it's actually entrepreneurs over 40 that have more success than entrepreneurs in their early 20s.
So the story is still yet to be written for us.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
All right.
I love people who peak after 40. I think, that is, it's great to see that. And so the first thing I would say is don't give up. It's going to be hard. Depending on the space you're working in, you may find an ageist bias. It's going to be hard if that's what you find, but don't give up. So that would be the first advice. Play to your strengths. Like your strength may be that you can take risks after 40, 45 with that you couldn't take when you were younger. So think about like risk calibration and whether starting a company now actually makes sense because you're in a better life stage and have more stability. You also have more ostensibly more social capital, if not financial capital. There are lots of reasons, right, why that research and the findings in that research make sense. I would recommend the book, which is among the best for any entrepreneur, sort of building a startup of any kind, really. And I teach it, I assign it to my students. It's called Innovator's Dilemma by Noam Wasserman, Professor Wasserman, while he was at Harvard Business School, was a protege of Clayton Christensen, who was famous for the idea of disruptive innovation. And did I say Innovator's Dilemma? That was
you said Innovator's Dilemma.
No, I meant to say Founder's Dilemma.
Oh, Founder's Dilemma. Okay.
Yes,
I'm just
the
dropping.
Noam Wasserman book is Founder's Dilemmas. And it's now a 10-year-old book, but based on surveys of thousands of companies, startups, and many more entrepreneurs, which looked at the root causes of startup failure.
Mhm.
Lots of great sort of insight into like what really drives success and failure in new ventures. But there is the first part of the book provides a really great framework for anyone of any age who is deciding whether or not they should start a company at this point in their life. I won't get into the framework
Okay.
because we could be here all night with it. There's some videos on YouTube about not only the book, but sort of the beginning of the book. So just Google or search for Noam Wasserman Founder's Dilemmas.
Okay. All right, cool. I have a question here from Christopher, and we sort of touched on this, but not directly. Are you able to comment on how Citi interacts with Yale Ventures and how the relationship between Tsai City and Yale Ventures is playing out? Like, are both organizations operating in tandem? Are there cooperative efforts? Can you elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, I could actually speak to a program that is in my portfolio that is a good example of where the two meet.
Okay.
And it's actually inaccurate to say the two, because Tsai City is part of Yale Ventures
Okay.
as organizationally. Now, there are two different functions.
Mhm.
Or a better way to think about two different customers, right? Tsai City's mandate. And this was, I did some research and found some remarks that President Salovey gave in 2018 when Tsai City was being dedicated. And as early as then, the president sort of said that Tsai City's mandate is broad in a sense that it supports innovation in all its forms, entrepreneurship being one manifestation of the innovator spirit. But it is very, very focused in a key way, and that is in who Tsai City serves, which are students. And I think, I'm waiting for someone to say, Jorge, you're telling a lie when I say this. I think Tsai City is the only center at Yale that serves in the university that serves students exclusively, right? And so while City doesn't have a lock on it doesn't have a monopoly on serving students, it's very clear that our work is focused on City is the center for innovative thinking at Yale. Thanks for that question. And Joe Tsai, one of the co-founders of Alibaba, is the namesake benefactor whose generous gift is the reason why we have Tsai City. Joe and Clara Wu Tsai, actually. And so the big distinctive, like to demarcate what Tsai City does and what Yale Ventures does, is around who our customer is, who do we serve primarily, right? Who's our key stakeholder? And at Tsai City, it is students. It's not a monopoly, but we're clear on who we serve. And our colleagues at Yale Ventures, who for a long time were working as the Office of Cooperative Research, their key stakeholder, their key customer are faculty innovators, right? And so this program that I mentioned earlier is a really cool sort of surface where the two come together. And so my colleagues last semester piloted a program called the Scientific Commercialization Exploratory Program that gave students an opportunity to partner and truly partner with faculty to explore sort of the IP, like how they could translate the IP in their labs into the marketplace, primarily through the creation of new ventures. And so it's basically for students who you may not believe it, but they're actually interested in, like as college students, interested in tech transfer and what that's all about. I'm thinking of one student in particular who is medical school bound, and did this program, and it totally transformed sort of his plan in a good way and upended in a good way his plans for his career. He still wants to get an MD, but he wants to work in tech transfer. He wants to continue to work with really smart scientists and help sort of unlock the IP that they generate and bring it out in the service of the world. And so he's a student, and right, so he's in our court at Tsai City, but he's working with faculty, which our colleagues in Yale Ventures are responsible for supporting. And so it's a good example to talk about the interface and the possibilities of how the two sides of the house come together to serve mutual interests. And I think, look, the bottom line, the last thing I'll say is whether you're serving innovators on the faculty or you're serving student entrepreneurs, all our work is linked and connected and shares a common interest in again, getting back to what I was saying earlier, in sort of inspiring and equipping Yale affiliates to go out into the world to have a positive impact and to exercise leadership in ways that improve and innovate around all the many problems that we face as a world. And so whether, my personal view is whether you're in charge of doing licensing deals for the university or finding ways to get more Yale students to start companies and raise capital, it's all connected. It's all driving at the same purpose. And so I see it as sort of one common, even though we have many roles, we have one common mission.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I did want to, this is kind of a big question, so maybe it's overambitious for me to lob this at you, but I'm going to ask it anyway from Aaron.
Okay.
How can we bring venture fluent thinking to existing organizations like government agencies and big businesses?
Oh, that's really interesting. I have not pondered that. So I should be clear. My
great
course,
question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. My course is called Venture Fluent because I believe that success in sort of early career venture capital and actually landing your first job in venture, which is the hardest job in venture you'll ever have to get. The others are relatively easier to land. Success is very much is a function of a lot of things, but table stakes, like the bare minimum, is that you can speak with credibility and confidence the language that VCs speak. And I do a lot of my mentoring at Tsai City actually is with students who want to break into VC and sort of coaching them on how, not only how to think, because that influences how you speak, but sort of the right sort of language, what things mean, because as an apprenticeship-based industry, it has its own language and idiomatic expression that I think is really tough to acquire if you're not already in the industry. And I acquired a lot of that language because I had the fortune of being able to be a Kauffman Fellow while also helping to get Silas Capital off the ground. And so every day I was acquiring new words, new ways of communicating that helped me build my credibility and my confidence. So that's why I frame this course, and really, like, people like learning languages, I think, for the most part. Some don't, when the students, when they have to wake up and go to class Monday to Friday at 8 a.m. But learning a new language is fun. And I want to make this fun. And I want each of my learners to kind of exit the course being fluent in the language of early stage venture capital. Now, the question is, like, how do you bring those mindsets into large corporations, right? Well, there's an intensive for that. So if you were an enrolled student, Victor Padilla-Taylor, who I mentioned earlier, is leading an intensive that is all about that. That is all about sort of how to be an entrepreneur and sort of, speaking of Clay Christensen, how, as a leader and an established incumbent, how to not get disrupted, how to disrupt yourself, which is the key teaching from his work. In order to survive, you have to, you have to basically disrupt yourself so you're not Blockbuster or Sears or on and on and on. So I think that's what venture fluency is in my context. And lots of people, I'm not, Clayton Christensen, all the way on down, have created a very rich literature on that topic that I would commend to the person who asked the question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Jorge, we are at time, and of course,
Oh,
I
that's
could
too bad.
chat with you for the rest of the evening, but I do want to be respectful of the time of our participants. So, I guess in closing, I would ask, first of all, how can people connect with you? What do you recommend?
How do people, depends on what they want to connect over.
Okay.
I prefer not to connect on LinkedIn unless I've met you.
Okay.
I think, you know, my email is jorge.torres@yale.edu, so you can email me. That's easy. And I especially if you're interested in coming back and plugging in, I will help make that happen in collaboration with my colleagues at Tsai City to get you into the pipeline in mentoring. But like actually the number one way I like connecting these days is in person, preferably over a meal. So come back to New Haven. You know, those of you, you know, who are passing through or are on the East Coast or coming to the East Coast, look me up when you're in New Haven. And maybe we can get lunch at Commons, which if you haven't been to Commons in a long time, it's going to blow your mind what Commons is looking like right now. So actually that connecting in person is really my favorite way of connecting.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. And I'm just going to vouch for what Jorge just said. I met Jorge a few weeks ago on campus, and we went to Commons for lunch, and it indeed blew my mind. It was so amazing. The food was amazing. The
food in particular, right, has gotten a lot better since.
I mean, I'm not going to knock the food in Commons ever, because I just always thought the food at Yale was great. Even though others will argue with me on that front, but yeah, I thought it was an amazing experience, and it's just in this day and age, don't get me wrong, I love our webinars through Accelerate Yale, but it is so nice to meet other Yaleys in person and to be able to enjoy the experience of Commons with a new friend is a great thing. So definitely take Jorge up on your offer, his offer. You won't regret it. So what I would say in closing here is, first of all, Jorge, I want to thank you so much for spending this hour of your evening with the Accelerate Yale community. We were so honored to have you here, especially given that it's Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month, great kind of confluence of dates, but we were going to invite you anyway. And then secondly, I just want to let everybody know that we are recording this session. So once we have it uploaded to YouTube, you'll see it posted to our social media channels on Facebook and LinkedIn. So make sure you're following us on LinkedIn and on YouTube. And then for those of you who are actually here this evening, registered for this evening, you will receive a link in your email to watch the replay if you wish. Okay. And so thanks to those of you who have offered to help us organize something in San Francisco. I will follow up with you, and just have a great rest of your night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It was our pleasure, Jorge. And I look forward to seeing you and Claire and everyone else on campus again very soon.
Awesome. See you soon.
Okay. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.